Today we're picking the best POI added to every single season of Fortnite, and we gotta start in Chapter 1, Season 1. And of all the POIs that the game started with, I gotta give it to Retail Row for Season 1. This obviously came out with the release of Battle Royale in 2017, and besides maybe Pleasant Park or Tomato Town, it's arguably the most iconic of all of the original POIs. In terms of loot, it also had the most amount of chests, making it very contested back in Season 1, easily claiming the best POI of Season 1. Now moving on to Season 2, we actually got quite a few new POIs. We got Shifty Shafts, Snobby Shores, Haunted Hills, Junk Junction, but one of these is obviously not like the rest because we also got Tilted Towers in Season 2, easily the best POI of maybe of all time. A lot of people landed at Tilted Towers. I mean, a lot of people. It also dethroned Retail Row for having the most amount of loot at one singular POI. And it was in a pretty good spot on the map, close enough to the middle where you could fight here pretty much for the first half of the game. And if you made it out alive, you were walking out with 10 to 15 kills. It's an absolute classic. Epic made so many different versions of Tilted Towers since its original release, and now it's back in Fortnite OG. Now in Chapter 1, Season 3, things slowed down because we only got one new POI, and it was Lucky Landing. Now, this wasn't an awful POI. The only downside, it was on the edge of the map. It is kind of iconic. Bugha won the World Cup in Season 9 landing here. They eventually added a trophy in this POI to honor Bugha's win. It was aesthetically pretty cool. It was a lot more different than the rest of the POIs on the map. But the thing is, it had no competition. It was the only POI added in Season 3. So obviously, it's the best POI added in Season 3. Now for Chapter 1, Season 4, I gotta give this one to Dusty Divot. People were really worried when the meteor landed at Dusty. It was a very loved POI, the original Dusty, but the new Dusty Divot actually made it worth landing at. Compared to the original one, this one has a ton more loot. They also added the Hop Rocks, which was like a new movement item at this POI. A lot of people were landing here. I think I dropped one of my first 30 bombs by landing at Dusty with a bunch of people in the first week of the new season. And you can't forget the iconic ice cream truck that was at this POI with 100,000 HP. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing Dusty Divot again in Season 4 once we get there in Fortnite OG. Now for Chapter 1, Season 5, we did get the introduction of Lazy Links and the entire new desert biome. But one POI in the desert biome stands above everything, and it's gotta be Paradise Palms. Me and the boys used to land here every single game. There were rifts right outside of the POI, so even though it was on the edge of the map, you could fight at Paradise and then rift to Retail or Salty and continue the action. It had a ton of loot. It was in the new desert biome, and it was so iconic that Epic used it for the new reload map, Oasis. I'm pretty sure I'd have Paradise Palms in like my top 5 POIs of all time, easily. Now in Chapter 1, Season 6, we got some changes to the map, but in my opinion, the floating island is the most iconic and best new addition to the game. I guess it was so good that they kind of recreated the floating island in multiple chapters later on, as we saw in Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, and now even in Chapter 6. It gave a decent amount of loot. It was great for rotation. And speaking of rotation, it started moving around the map as well later on. So it definitely is very memorable and is a very iconic POI that a lot of Fortnite gamers remember. Now for Chapter 1, Season 7. And this one's a little bit interesting because in Chapter 1, Season 7, Epic started experimenting with a new thing called the block, where people could submit player-created POIs, but it did have one flaw. And the fact is that it changed every week, so players didn't really want to land at a POI that they had to relearn every single week. But with Season 7, we also got Frosty Flights, we got Polar Peak, and you know I got to give this one to Polar Peak. For Season 7, the best POI has to be Polar Peak. It's where they added the Mythic Sword, which everyone remembers being one of the most powerful items in the game. It has to be one of the tallest POIs we had added in Chapter 1. And if I remember correctly, back in Chapter 1, Season 7, it was the spot I dropped at the most, especially when I was chasing for that Mythic Sword. Now in Chapter 1, Season 8, we got a lot of changes on the map with a volcano and a new jungle biome. And I'm going to have to pick Lazy Lagoon as the best added POI of Season 8. It was very cool. It had the cannons, the ship, a ton of loot on the dock and on the ship. It was just a fun place to land at and get some action in. And it was definitely designed in a very unique look and style, at least at the time back in Chapter 1. Now in Chapter 1, Season 9, we got 3 new POIs. We got Mega Mall, we got Neo Tilted, and we got the Pressure Plant, which replaced the volcano. But I'm gonna have to give this one to Neo Tilted. Even though, in my opinion, it's a downgrade from the original Tilted, it's still a very, very hot drop. It had a ton of loot, and the slipstreams made it very good to move around inside the actual POI and to leave the POI to go out to other places on the map. This was also during the World Cup era, so there's a lot of iconic fights that happened at this POI. Now we move on to a season that had a lot of changes to the map with Season X. We had the Taco Tuesday at Greasy Grove. We had the prop hunt at Moisty Mire, the zombies at Retail Row. It was all over the place, but one POI stands above them all. And honestly, it's kind of hard to pick between these two because we had 2 different versions of Tilted Towers during this season. We had Tilted Town, which was our first look at zero build. You could not build in Tilted Town, but we also had Gotham City. And even though I landed a ton at Tilted Town and that was my drop spot during competitive that season, I gotta give this one to Gotham City. It was done very well. It had its own unique lighting once you entered it, similar to Tilted Town, and it just really, really made you feel like you were playing some sort of Batman game with all the Batman mythics that got added during that part of the season. Now we move on to a new chapter, Chapter 2, Season 1. A lot of new POIs got added, a lot of iconic POIs, but in my opinion, my favorite one from Season 1 has to be Slurpy Swamp. The infinite heals and the new slurp barrel mechanic made sure that you were always leaving Slurpy with full health, full shield. You could even use the slurp to stay alive in the storm. And you guys remember Laser Beam and myself and Courage as well try to do challenge where we stay in the storm the entire time. It also just had a lot of loot compared to some of the other Chapter 2 Season 1 POIs. If you guys remember, Chapter 2 Season 1 was a pretty bare bones map. But things changed in Chapter 2 Season 2 because now we have another iconic POI. And this one is easily the best POI of Chapter 2 Season 2. And in my opinion, one of the top 5 POIs of all time. I got to give it to the OG Agency. You get the Midas Mythic drum gun. You get the vault with all the loot. The henchmen running around screaming gibberish. And you were in the dead center of the map, so you were always safe from the first couple of zones at least. There was also launch pads and helicopters eventually added, so it was good for mobility, and you were surrounded by water, so people really had to like swim or build across to get to you. Overall, just an iconic, absolute classic of a POI. Now in Chapter 2 Season 3, the entire map flooded, and we had some new POIs like the Fortilla and Rickety Rig, and of course Coral Castle. I gotta give it to the Authority. This is a reskin version of the Agency, and in my opinion, it's not as good as the Agency, but it's still the best POI of that season. It was kind of like a rebranded Agency. The outside was kind of fortified by this like walls with little rooms, still a ton of loot to be had, and you were still dead center in the map, making it a very powerful spot to land at. Now in Chapter 2, Season 4, we have another obvious pick. With one of the biggest mid-season updates we ever had in Fortnite, they added Stark Industries to the game, and that became the best POI of that season and potentially top 5 POIs of all time. A ton of loot with a vault. The Iron Man Mythic was also there, and so were the Iron Man exclusive cars. And they had these special chests that were spitting out legendary and epic pump shotguns. You had Mongrel and his trio landing here in the FNCS. They ended up winning FNCS by landing here. Everyone was hot dropping here in ranked non-stop action. You were also elevated on the map, so like it was really hard to get third party. People would have to rift or like climb up to get to you. Now we're moving on to Chapter 2 Season 5. We had some unique new POIs. We had the Coliseum and a few other things, but one POI stood out above them all. Epic took 2 of our favorite POIs, Salty Springs and Tilted Towers, and they combined them into Salty Towers, and in my opinion, it kind of worked. It was a decent mix between both POIs. It had a ton of loot. It was towards the center of the map. It was even closer to the center of the map than where Tilted was. Some of it was covered by sand, but it was still a very good POI to drop at. And now we're moving on to a season where I don't really want to pick a POI. We have Chapter 2 Season 6. All the new POIs they added with this new biome were very bad. The Spire, Colossal Crops. I'm still going to have to pick one. And in my opinion, I'll just have to pick Colossal Crops. Even though these POIs were very awkwardly made, They didn't really work well with the building grid. At least Colossal Crops was a little bit more spread out. It had more materials, more mats. Overall, still like just not my favorite season and not my favorite map at all. Now for chapter 2, season 7, I'm gonna have to give it to Believer Beach. This was a rebrand, reskinned Sweaty Sands, which got added all the way back in the beginning of chapter 2, but it was a little bit different now with the alien theme. We had some visual changes. At one point, there was a giant alien ship you could fly up to with loot. They added a bunch of crash pads on the POI as well, making it very easy to move around the POI, and landing at the top of the hotel was also kind of a classic. You'd land there, get high ground, loot up, and start farming people as they're flying in. Okay, for chapter 2, season 8, it's a bit tricky because you guys remember the alien ship broke into a million pieces and crashed onto the map, but the actual map changes for season 8 were very minimal. And if I had to pick anything at all, I will probably give it to Destroyed Dish. I know you guys probably don't even remember this POI. Like I said, the map changes this season were god awful. This one had wind tunnels, which made it cool for mobility. There was also a couple of houses and bunkers around and a lot of things that you could farm up at this POI. Most of the changes on the map this season were very minimal. We didn't have any really, unique POIs that were actually good. Visually, the pyramid was stunning, but it wasn't a good POI to land at. So I'm just not going to give it to it. I'm going to give it to Destroyed Dish. And if you don't agree, then you don't agree. And now we move on to a new chapter. Chapter 3, season 1. A lot of cool places to land at. A lot of iconic places. But I'm going to give it to the Daily Bugle. Even though it's a collab POI, it was still a very fun POI to land at. You had the spider webs for mobility. And there was also the guaranteed Spider-Man bags, which you could loot for the Spider-Man mythic. And they were guaranteed at this POI. There was only 3 buildings, but they were all huge with a ton of loot in them. The only problem was getting third-partied from the hills around the POI, but with the spider webs and the mythics, it was kind of easy to get in and out anyways. I do want to give some honorable mentions. Covert Cavern was a really solid spot. Rocky Reels was also fun. Chonker Speedway. There was a lot of good POIs this season, so it was kind of hard to pick the Daily Bugle over the others, but I think Daily Bugle has them beat just by a little bit. Now for chapter 3, season 2, I'm going to give it to Command Cavern. You got to remember also, this was the season where we got 0 build, and Command Cavern played really well with 0 build. You had the floating blimp at the very, very top, and you could go into the cavern, and there was a bunch of loot in there. It kind of felt like the grotto from chapter 2. Of course, Gunner was there with his mythic as well. And because it's all inside and underground, getting third-partied here wasn't as common. And now we move on to chapter 3, season 3. I'm going to give this one to Reality Falls. Visually, this one is one of the prettiest POIs they have ever added. The loot was okay, but the blue mushrooms all around this POI giving you shield kind of gave you that Slurpy swamp effect where you were always walking out of here with full health, full shield. Fighting on the tree and climbing up the tree was also an experience. There was even a strategy that people used in the FNCS to stay alive in the storm by doing like a parkour course where they just kept hitting the mushrooms that healed you at this POI over and over to win the heal off. Now for chapter 3, season 4, we had some map changes, and I'm going to give this one to Cloudy Condos. This was kind of like a remix of Condo Canyon that was added in chapter 3, season 1. All they really did was lift up the POI with the balloons to save it from the chrome, but it definitely made it a little bit different, and there wasn't a lot of other changes to the map during this season. And also, they filmed a good chunk of the SypherPK icon skin trailer at this POI because my skin came out during this season, so that's why I picked it. Now for chapter 4, season 1, we had a lot of new POIs. Of course, it's a new chapter. We had Anvil Square, Brutal Bastion, Lonely Labs, Slappy Shores, Frenzy Fields as well. But in my opinion, the one that really, really looked very different and made me feel like I was playing a completely different game, like some sort of Skyrim MMORPG, was the Citadel. During chapter 4, Epic even made some lighting changes where the light looks different from the outside as it comes in, and it looked fantastic on this map. Landing at the top of the Citadel, all the things that we did in the Citadel, the Nikkei 30 role plays, Tfue clutching up, 1v4 squad wiping. That is the spot that is most memorable in my opinion and the best POI of chapter 4, season 1, and maybe even all of chapter 4. But maybe not all of chapter 4, because in chapter 4, season 2, we had a new POI, a massive POI, Mega City. This was huge. It was ginormous. They had so much going on that your FPS was always dropping while you were in Mega City. It also had a vault, which you could end up getting the Mythic Havoc shotgun, which hit for over 200 damage, 250 headshot damage before they nerfed it, and still over 200 after they nerfed it. It was a ton of loot. You were always coming out of here with a lot of the best weapons in the game. It was fun to fight at. The grind rails, the cars, just non-stop action at this POI. It was a good attempt at recreating an iconic POI like Tilted Towers. Although, if I remember correctly, after a few weeks passed, a lot of people stopped landing here, and I'm assuming it's because their FPS was dropping too much to be landing here. That's the truth, because it was a solid POI besides that. Now, in Chapter 4, Season 3, we didn't get a lot of great changes to the map because we had the jungle season with like the whole new jungle biome. But I'll have to give it to Rumble Ruins. It was probably the most solid POI they added that season. It's also the most recognizable one from that season. It had a lot of little secrets and places to hide, and overall just was closer to the center of the map, so you didn't really have to worry about zone. But in Chapter 4, Season 4, they did cook with 3 new POIs that were all very solid. But of the 3 new Vault POIs, I gotta give it to Eclipse Estate. I mean, just look at the little moon in the background. Visually, this POI looks amazing. It was also really fun to fight at. The underground vault, hiding in the water, camping the vault, just a ton of action at this POI, and all the new POIs they added this season were amazing. Like, they were all fantastic, really well made, but Eclipse Estate was probably my favorite one. And of course, that's where the main guy from that season, Kato Thorn, that was his spot, and he was there, and he would drop a kinetic blade if you defeated him. And now we move on to Chapter 5, Season 1. Of course, brand new map. We had a lot of new POIs. Grand Glacier, Reckless Railway, Ruined Reels. But of all these POIs, if I had to pick one where there was the most action and had some of the best loot, I gotta give it to Fencing Fields. It had the best mythic AR, it had the underground vault as well, and it was close enough to the center of the map. People would always rotate here after landing anywhere else, and if you landed here, it was an absolute bloodbath to open the vaults. Now in Chapter 5, Season 2, we had 2 brand new biomes, okay? This was actually really hard to pick between these 2 POIs because we have Grimgate and we have Mount Olympus. Visually, Mount Olympus, in my opinion, looks the best. It looks amazing. It looks like it's not from Fortnite. The huge statue with the sword was insane, and you could land up there, and there was even loot up there. But from a POI perspective, we're not just talking about looks, or else this list would look a little bit different. We're also talking about how effective the POI is to land at. Now, at Grimgate, you guys remember, there was the green water, which made fighting there very interesting and made mobility there very unique. But you could also use the green water to rotate out of the POI very quickly. On top of that, though, it had the best mythic in the game, the Mythic Cerberus shotgun, and the best medallion, the Mythic Cerberus medallion. And that's why it's the best one from Chapter 5, Season 2. And now we're going to a season that a lot of people did not like, but there were a lot of map changes. Chapter 5, Season 3. We had the new desert biome, which included Redline Rig, Brutal Beachhead, Sandy Steppes, and Nitro Dome, or Nitro Drome, whatever they called it. Either ways, not a lot of these POIs are fan favorites, but I think I'm going to go with Nitro Drome. It was unique to fight there, especially with the cars. You kind of felt like you were having like a car fight. You're playing like pretty much a different game. The music there wasn't that annoying. It was loud, but it wasn't that annoying. It actually was kind of a vibe. The loot there was also insane because you got the mythic medallion that gave you infinite ammo, and you got the mythic crossbow, which if you combined it with the mythic medallion that gave you infinite ammo, became a problem. You also get the mythic cars. You guys remember that one was one of the better ones that you could get. It's also closer to the center of the map. There was the cactus around that would regenerate and give you shield, and there was a good amount of loot and things to farm in the POI and right around it. Now we move on to Chapter 5, Season 4, the Marvel season that didn't quite live up to the expectations of the previous Marvel season, but it still gave us a pretty cool POI, Castle Doom. Very unique design, very cool POI to land at. A lot of people were landing here for the Doom Mythic and the Doom pistol. It was a massive POI with a ton of loot, and there was also the rotation that you could do where you would just use the little Doom tower to fly and rotate. I landed here a lot during the FNCS and during Cash Cups, and overall it just does better than the other POIs added this season. And now we move on to a new chapter, the chapter we're currently in, Chapter 6. We have Seaport City, we have Mass Meadows, we have Night Shift Forest, Demon's Dojo. Look, all these POIs are very beautiful. Design-wise, they're incredible. But if I gotta give one that gives an insane amount of loot and an insane amount of materials, there could be a few, but I'm gonna go with Night Shift Forest. They had the unique mechanic where you capture the sprite, give it to that guy. He gives you a key to open the vault. The forest goes from nighttime to daytime when you do this. It's just a very unique design, very fun gameplay to land here and go for that. And then once you open that vault, you had all the loot in the world to finish out the match. But for Chapter 6, Season 2, we got a whole new biome and a lot of POIs added. But I got to give it to the main POI of this season, Crime City. Landing here feels like maybe playing GTA 6 but early access, because you do not want to land this POI unless you know what you are doing or you're getting packed up and sent back to the lobby. There's a ton of loot, a lot of buildings. The design and look of this POI is very cool. And of course, there is a vault there, and sometimes the wolf guy is also there with the mythic pistol. So really, really solid POI, a ton of loot, close to the center of the map, closer to the center of the map compared to the other new POIs. And overall just has a very unique and cool design. The honorable mention for this one, in my opinion, has to be Lone Wolf Lair. That's probably one of my most drop spots at the game. It kind of reminds me of Lavish Lair, and it's also kind of a similar vibe, a big mansion with a vault to loot as well. But I think Crime City has just a little bit more aura and a little bit more loot. Let me know what you guys think about this list, and let me know what you think I should rank next. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video.